Well, as the UK heads into another general election, this weekend is the 20th anniversary of New Labour's first election victory in 1997. Tony Blair went on to win 2 further elections, so it also happens to be the 10th anniversary of the end of his decade in power. Mr. Blair is with me now. We are in Millbank Tower, one of the locations associated very strongly with New Labour. But just want to ask you, first of all, as a politician, as a political leader, what do you think of Mrs May's decision to call an election?
It's a pretty obvious decision.
Would you have done it?
I don't know whether I would have done it or not, but I mean, I can understand why she's done it, because obviously if the polls are right, then the Labour Party's in a very weak position, and it's better for her probably to have an election before we get to what will be a very tough negotiation over Brexit, rather than during such a negotiation.
We'll talk about that later on, but let's now go from this location just down the Thames to another famous location, the Festival Hall, the morning after that first Labour election victory.
A new dawn has broken, has it not? And it is wonderful. We always said that if we had the courage to change, then we could do it. And we did it.
A new dawn breaking. That wasn't spontaneous, was it? A new dawn has broken, has it not?
It sort of was spontaneous, actually, because you can never tell with the weather. The weather, I think, that morning was good. It was probably a little, in retrospect, a little overdone, actually. And so I was.
Was it your line?
It was my line. But the moment I said it, I kind of thought, maybe that's a bit too much.
You were surprised, though, by the scale of your victory?
I was surprised by it, yeah. But on the other hand, it had become pretty clear during the course of the campaign that we were very likely to win. But we'd lost 4 elections, and we'd been out of power for almost 2 decades. And so we got into the way of losing. So even if you saw the opinion polls, and they looked very strong, on the other hand, you know, we've been there, we appeared to have been there before and lost. So I was so keen that we were not complacent that I virtually obliterated, even from my own mind, the prospect of how large the majority would be.
First crisis you faced was a really unexpected one, the sudden death of Princess Diana, again, where we got one of your most famous quotations.
The people everywhere, not just here in Britain, everywhere, they kept faith with Princess Diana. They liked her, they loved her, they regarded her as one of the people. She was the people's princess. And that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
Now, looking back on that, it was obviously a highly emotional moment. Was it a moment of national crisis, do you think?
I don't know, a moment of national crisis. It was a moment of it was a moment that overwhelmed the nation.
And public opinion swinging around very strongly about the monarchy.
Yes, my view was always that in the end people would come to a supportive position of the monarchy, but I also thought it was important that we tried to make sure that the nation came together and that we didn't end up with a division between the monarchy and the people, which at times during the course of the days following Princess Diana's death, it looked as if that might happen. And I thought that was, first of all, definitely not what she would have wanted, but secondly, you know, destructive of what should be a moment of national coming together.
I mean, difficult in the sense that your government contained some radicals, some Republicans, and yet you were trying to help the monarchy at that point.
Yeah, but I was never like that myself. I mean, I was always of the view that my generation had come to a fairly sensible position about the monarchy, which is that all in all, it's of benefit to the country. No, we don't live in the age of deference anymore, but on the other hand, you know, I think there was a great respect for the Queen, still is a great respect for the Queen and for the institution.
Devolution, Scotland. You did that because you inherited it, not because you thought it was the right thing. Would that be fair?
No, I think that wouldn't be fair. I mean, I was always anxious about it because you don't know whether if you create a new settlement, you deal with the issue of independence or you stimulate the issue of independence. And at points in the last 20 years, sometimes it looks as if we'd settle it, and sometimes it looks as if we stimulated it.
It was done to head off a push for independence, wasn't it?
Well, it was done, certainly, because there was a settled will of the Scottish people that things had to change. And people forget this. I mean, devolution is an issue that has troubled British politics for over a century. And, people had continually tried to create devolution and failed. It brought down governments in the 19th century. It split, of course, with the split in Ireland. It was a fundamental question in the early 20th century politics. So I was very, very well aware of the fact that we had to deal with it, and we did deal with it. I think the one thing, the thing I would reproach myself for now in respect of devolution is that I think I underestimated, certainly, that when you do devolution, because it involves a measure of distance between England and Scotland, right, what was important at the same time was to create, insofar as possible, a sense of cultural cohesion at the same time. So I think we should have looked for more powerful ways of trying to bring the union together at the same time as we were obviously creating that devolution and separation.
Because, again, with hindsight, the problem is that it hasn't satisfied the urge for independence. I mean, the urge for independence in the last general election ran extremely strongly to...
That is true, although obviously it's an open question as to whether if we hadn't done devolution, we would have ended up with an unstoppable force for independence.
Let's listen to you talking about the Good Friday Agreement.
A day like today, I mean, it's not a day for sort of sound bites, really. We can leave those at home, but I feel the hand of history upon our shoulder in respect of this. I really do. And I just think we need to acknowledge that and respond to it. Now, maybe it's impossible to find a way through. Maybe even with the best faith in the world, you can't do it. But it's right to try. So I'm here to try.
Very serious moment, but it's always that no time for sound bites, but the hand of history is on our shoulders.
Oh my God, it literally came into my head as I was speaking. I mean, it literally came in and popped out of my mouth, and obviously the moment I'd said it, I realised how absurd it was to say no time for sound bites and then deliver a sort of, a pure form of sound bite. And when I went back afterwards, I remember Alistair Campbell saying to me, "What the hell was that?" Hand of history all about. So, but it was a huge moment. Although interestingly, you can see it was only less than a year after I'd come to power that the ageing process had set in.
And that was an agreement done without the Reverend Ian Paisley, who ended up being the dominant figure in Northern Irish politics.
Yeah, but. And this is, hugely to the credit, frankly, of David Trimble, because he took unionism over the line with the Good Friday Agreement. And actually, the curious thing about it is that Sinn Féin didn't actually sign the Good Friday Agreement, and Ian Paisley was obviously at that point opposed to the Good Friday Agreement. So you had this somewhat curious thing that the two parties that then subsequently came into government and made it work weren't in fact signed up to the Good Friday Agreement. But this was an extremely difficult negotiation. I think probably we could only have done it in the first flush of government. We had a sense that you could do anything at that point. We were less tamed, if you like, by the challenges and the frustrations of governing. And, obviously we and I look back on that as one of our biggest achievements.
The violence, by and large, has ended, and yet the power sharing is not working right now.
No, and this is what shows you've got to keep on it the whole time. It takes a long time to try and, take all the distrust and the malaise out of the politics. And, hopefully in time to come, you will get to a non-sectarian politics in Northern Ireland, though I worry about the implications, obviously, of Brexit for Northern Ireland, for the peace process.
That led to 2001, a second landslide victory, and then 9/11 happened, which really has come, for many people, to define the Blair years. Let's listen again to what you had to say about that.
This is not a battle between the United States of America and terrorism. but between the free and democratic world and terrorism. We therefore here in Britain stand shoulder to shoulder with our American friends in this hour of tragedy, and we, like them, will not rest until this evil is driven from our world.
You were perhaps the world leader, the quickest world leader to articulate what you felt the significance of 9/11 was. Why was that? Was that because you were expecting it?
I wasn't expecting that, but I saw this Islamist threat from, I think, quite an early stage, and believed it was much more profound than we thought. And so when 9/11 happened, which at the time was you recall, it was an event that didn't just shock the world, it traumatized it. In the circumstances of that time, I saw that as the culmination of a process that had built up over time and a huge threat to global security.
And you also saw, or your view was, that we had no alternative. We had to be shoulder to shoulder with the Americans, which effectively resulted in signing up for all that followed in Afghanistan, Iraq and elsewhere.
Well, I certainly believe that it was important to be shoulder to shoulder with the Americans. I mean, they'd attacked that part of New York for a reason. It wasn't just to do with America, it was a symbol of the free world. But the closeness of alliance
meant, sometimes perhaps doing things against your better judgment.
Well, it certainly meant that, once these partnerships and alliances aren't forged in the easy times, they're forged in the hard times, and when it's really tough to stay the course. So, obviously this is a matter of huge controversy now as to whether we should have been together with the US, but I believe it's very, very important that Britain does stand shoulder to shoulder with the US, particularly at moments of global crisis.
Do you think Britain's role in Iraq actually confirmed the 5 principles you laid down in Chicago for intervention?
Yes, I think they do, obviously, but again, that's a matter of huge dispute because others don't. And, look, we can go over Iraq again and again. I personally, I think that if we'd left him in power, he would have turned out like Assad, or indeed like the leader in North Korea. I think he would have ended up as a significant threat to the world. But you can't go back and, take a different decision and see how it would have turned out.
But you did have to make the case to the country. You went to Parliament, you secured a vote. Again, let's listen to what you said about the threat.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons, that Saddam has continued to produce them, that he has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes, including against his own Shia population, and that he is actively trying to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
I mean, the problem with all of that is that, what you were saying turned out to be wrong, didn't it?
Yeah, and, there's never enough times that you can apologise for the intelligence being wrong, but that was the intelligence we were given, and we were given it, by the way, for a very simple reason. He was the one leader in the world who'd actually used WMD since the Second World War, and had done that to devastating effect in the region and with his own people. So, sometimes today people go literally to the other extreme and say, well, he really wasn't a threat in relation to those things at all. In my view, he most definitely was.
And in a sense, the reaction to the war has kind of destroyed your political life.
Not for me, it's not. I mean, people say that. It's too early to judge, frankly, how people come out on the Middle East, although my own view very strongly is that the reasons we had difficulties in Iraq were for the reasons of the Islamist problem, coming both from Iran on the one side and Sunni extremism on the other side, that we see today. And when
you think that would have happened anyway? You don't think destabilising Iraq led to that destabilisation we're now seeing in Syria? And
it certainly didn't lead to the destabilisation of Syria. And if people say this, they really need to go and analyse what actually happened. I mean, the fact is, Syria was perfectly stable between 2003 and 2011. What sparked the events in Syria was the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia and then spread right throughout the region, and in my view would have come to Iraq had Saddam still been in power, where you had 20% of the population ruling 80% of the population. In the same way in Syria, you had the small number of people around Assad ruling the rest of the population.
But in terms of action and reaction, ironically, it led to Jeremy Corbyn taking over the Labour Party?
I don't know, that's a big stretch for me.
Well, he was, a founder of the Stop the War movement. The Labour Party felt disgusted by what it had done in power and has swung in that direction.
This is not a right reading of history. When I left office in 2007, there was then Gordon took over. Yeah. In 2010, the Labour Party actually its membership voted by significant majority for David Miliband. So there was no reason for us to end up in the present situation.
Except they ended up with Ed Miliband as leader.
Well, we did, for the reasons that we know. But all I'm saying to you is it's not as if when I left office, the Labour Party was in a state of revolt, wanted to rip up everything that New Labour...
But, I mean, you were saying in this election you are going to vote Labour, but only kind of out of sentimentality. You're not telling everyone else to vote Labour.
No, I'm not telling people not to vote Labour. Of course I want people to vote Labour, but...
Well, hand on heart, you could say to people, Jeremy Corbyn is the best person to be Prime Minister in a month's time?
Look, if the polls are right, and I'm not saying it's desirable, and I'm not saying they are right, but if the polls are right, we know who's going to be Prime Minister on June the 9th. That's not the issue.
Who?
It'll be Theresa May, if the polls are right. If the polls are right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you're
so I'm not predicting that.
No, but if you're saying vote Labour, you are saying, I want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister.
I don't think that's the real issue in this election. I think the real issue is blank cheque. It's what mandate does she claim, both on Brexit and on the health service, education and all the other things. And I think the most powerful argument for Labour in this election, because of the way the polls are and the way the opinion polls are on the leadership issue, the most powerful argument for Labour is to say it's important for our democracy that the government's held properly to account and she needs a strong opposition.
What would you say you're proudest of?
There's lots of different things. I mean, I think you could talk about the changes we've made socially in terms of attitudes to race, to women's equality, to gay rights. Obviously, there's things like the Good Friday Agreement that we've talked about. I think we did make big improvements. And if you take the satisfaction ratings when we left office in the health service, we did turn the health service around, which is why it's such a tragedy it's in the state it is today. But then I think, there's other things. I mean, obviously, all the foreign policy stuff that's been most controversial is well known, but I'm very proud of what we did on overseas aid. I mean, we didn't just treble aid. We brought in program. We created the Department of International Development, which is probably the lead development department in the world today. And by the way, there are millions of people...
A lot of people say wasting masses of money, a bureaucracy, with private individuals profiteering from the taxpayer.
I don't think that is fair, by the way. I think there are lots of reforms we can make in overseas aid, and we should always keep reforming. But, because of the work I now do in Africa, I see the difference in the millions of lives that have been saved or improved by what has been given generously by this country.
Do you think either side in this election are posing the right questions, facing the British people with the right issues and their solutions for them?
Well, I think the big missing question, which has got to be there, is a question that may sound extraordinarily technical, but is absolutely fundamental to the future prosperity of this country, which is in the Brexit negotiation, are we taking membership of the single market and customs union off the table, which I think we probably are.
I think we are. I think that's what government documents say.
If we are, and we're going for a free trade agreement, rather than membership of the single market, that is a massive thing for the future of the British economy. That's why our currency is still down 15%.
Yeah, it's the Liberal Democrats, not the Labour Party, that are talking about that.
Well, the Labour Party has been talking about it, but it should talk about it. In a confused
way.
Well, I think it's clearer now, actually, what the Labour Party position is, and it's very much what I'm saying, is you should put all the options on the table. But this is fundamental. One of the reasons why this election is, I think it's unique in my experience, actually. I can't think of a parallel in recent times, because what the Conservatives have done cleverly, and they're doing the right polling. The Labour Party should be doing its own polling to work out exactly what messages work, and as I say, I think blank cheque is the one that works. But look, what the Tories have done very cleverly is give people a national interest reason for voting Tory. What they've said is, look, the patriotic thing, irrespective of your politics, is to vote Conservative because she needs a strong hand in the negotiation, which is a very persuasive argument until you realise that she's tied her own hands in the negotiation, the Prime Minister, by saying, I'm not going to put the single market on the table. And this is, people have really got to understand the difference between the single market and a free trade agreement. I mean, one's the Champions League, the other's League One.
Yeah, but the problem with the single market, as you very well know, is That means continued freedom of movement for people within Europe. It means continued payments into European Union institutions, and it means acceptance of the European courts. Those surely are the things that the majority, albeit 52%, rejected.
Right, but then the important thing is, if you really wanted to do this in the interest of the country, you start to break that down for people. When you look at the immigration coming from Europe, even government ministers...
For which a lot of people blame you, by the way, for not putting on the transition controls.
You could have had the transitional period. It would have come to an end in 2011. The bulk of people have come since 2011. So,
You don't think it was a mistake not to put on transition controls?
Well, I do think we underestimated the numbers of people, but it was a completely different situation in 2004. And by the way, never forget, this is what's so extraordinary to me about this current situation. Enlargement of the European Union, bringing Eastern Europe into Europe, was a huge positive thing. Economically, politically, for our security. Supposing we hadn't brought those countries like Poland into the European Union, think the situation we'd have with Russia today. So the weird thing to me is, enlargement was a big bipartisan principle, Tory and Labour. Single market was actually Margaret Thatcher's creation, and now we're apparently against both of them.
Do you think the government or politicians these days do enough to make their case? I mean, we used to sit in this room every day during the general election. You would take whatever questions were there. You did interviews. You weren't a fan of television debates. But now we don't get any of that, frankly. We just get a few sound bites.
Yeah, no, it's a big problem. I mean, politics conducted by tweet is not very elevated.
What about you? I mean, you're not in the House of Lords. You could fight for a seat again?
Yeah, I think this would be this would be a step too far.
It would liven things up.
It would liven things up, yes, but possibly not.
So we can take that as a no. You will not be standing in this election.
Yeah, you can take that as a no. Yeah.
Thank you.